good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are, where you're tuning in from. And thank you for joining us once again, virtually, at Pier 17 in San Francisco for the second event of a series of events and conversations on the design at work. I'm Joy Deucher. I'm the CEO of Swissnex San Francisco, which is the innovation outpost of Switzerland around here. And Switzerland is also a country home to many great designers. So this is our second event of a series that we co-organize, co-host with the world-leading Swiss design firm Vitra. And Vitra has been pushing the boundaries of the design discipline since 80 years and is also our partner in crime when it comes to rethinking our own co-working space here at Pier 17 in San Francisco. So a month ago, we kickstarted the series Design at Work with San Francisco-based design icon Yves Béat discussing our new normal and the blending of the work and living space, how the office will become more of a meeting and community space as opposed to a space for focused work, how designers have a crucial role in ensuring that the tech-enabled workplace and robots are not substituting, but rather complementing and augmenting the human. And if you're interested in hearing more from that previous conversation, if you missed it, you can find the recording of it on the Swissnex San Francisco YouTube channel. But today we are very excited to welcome Claude Zellweger, design director at Google, to our second talk. And Claude is an industrial designer, leads immersive design at Google, where he is responsible for the AR and VR space and future hardware categories. He's been there for a few years now, since 2016, helped to launch Daydream View and shape the upcoming AI-driven hardware. He also held a position as VP of design at HTC before and oversaw the design of smartphones. And Claude is a regular speaker on topics of design and innovation, AR, VR, and most recently also design for artificial intelligence. As his name might suggest, he was born in Switzerland. He moved to California to study design at the Art Center, and he lives and works in San Francisco today. And just like the last talk, this conversation today is being hosted by Vitra's Future of Work Trendscout, Raphael Gielgen, who usually travels the world, visiting companies, doing a lot of research work on the future of the workplace, and has been doing this still somewhat mobile in Europe, I believe, but more and more virtual as well. So I'm very excited to kickstart the series, to kickstart the second talk today. So thank you, Raphael. Thank you, Claude, for joining. One last thing, everybody stay tuned for the next session, which is planned in a month's time. Just visit our website or sign up to make sure you get the newsletter, and we look forward to seeing you then. And with no further ado now, Raphael, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So yeah, good morning or good evening, wherever you are. I'm today in Munich at the office of Jones Lang LaSalle. So take the opportunity to make the session from here before I go home. So welcome, Claude. Where are you now?
Thank you very much, Raphael. I'm so glad to be on the panel. I'm calling in from California. And I have to say, I'm just, Swissnex is one of my favorite organizations in San Francisco, and Vitra is one of my favorite companies in the design space. So I'm super excited to be here.
So, Claude, let us know a little bit, how did you spend the last 5 or 6 months, and which kind of learning you take from this COVID time?
So I think, like everybody in the Bay Area, I have been, and around the world, I have been confined mostly to my home. I've been on a cadence of going into the office every couple of weeks, which really helps me to stay grounded. And also, since I work a lot in the physical space, it is important for us to have a level of interaction with objects, tactility, reviewing material samples, and so on. And so we've developed a pretty sophisticated courier service in the meantime, where we are sending physical models around. So we really don't have to be at work that much, until next year's. And I think, the learnings have been really broad and deep. I think, as you have discussed in your last talk, we've really seen an acceleration of trends that were already on the rise. And I think now we're all experiencing these hands-on, really, the pros and cons of remote working. But I would say overall, it's mostly the benefits of it, that seeing that we can actually get a great productivity in unexpected ways.
So in one hand side, it must be now your time. Because as we all start to work remote and as we all understand the tools, so it must be exciting for you to bring in your tools in augmented or virtual reality into the world soon.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, so the promise of immersive work in the future is that we can be more focused, we can be more inspired, we can have more tools at our disposal, and we can be having connections with people quicker and faster. And so I think on the one hand, there's kind of a dilemma there with immersive and work, because to be truly immersed in a space, to feel like you're truly there, right? The benefits of that have to be greater than the burden of going into an immersive space. So having to put on a headset or having to interact in ways that maybe aren't natural. So as long as we're not quite there yet in terms of like where the benefits outweigh the friction points. And so I think the promise is really big. It's coming. I'm super excited to see some of these technologies move ahead. But there's still a little bit of time, that it needs to gestate.
So our topic is a time period in 2030, and we would love to invite the people to think about a preferred future. So how is your preferred future, what you think? How will we work in 10 years from now? And it doesn't matter if it's physically or if it is virtual. What do you think?
Right. So I think very much, if I think about work in the future, it's obviously a blend between the physical and the virtual, because I think as a mental model, the way I think about it is that work is kind of a cognitive space, right? It happens wherever you are. And so I think both spaces need to adapt dynamically, and office systems need to scale dynamically. So if I think about locations, for instance, the home is going to become more like the office more like the home, right? And then there's also these things in between where certainly with like in the Bay Area, you think a lot about the commute. And the commute will also change, right? I think there's something that people perceive sometimes as something negative, having to spend a lot of time in between places. That can become a space of inspiration and of calm and of focus and of good work essentially being done. And then also I think we can think outside of the sort of the headquarter mentality, that there will be a resurgence of like micro offices that allow people to gather in smaller teams, and certainly that's also sort of friendly to the idea of staying safe and contamination in the way we think about it. And then I think also we need offices to be adaptable into work styles, right? Whether you're creative that needs a lot of hands-on tools, or you're someone who's essentially in meetings all day, right? And a lot of us wear different hats throughout the days. And so office systems need to scale to those different modalities of heads down work or co-creation. And the needs are changing, right? So like sometimes you need a lot of privacy. Sometimes you want that sort of open communication flow. You may need digital pin boards. You may need other tools. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things that sort of grow.
I want to come back to one point that sounds really interesting. When you mentioned to improve or to create a commute experience. So today, before COVID, a commute experience was like people are sitting in the train or bus with their headphones, looking their smartphone. Let us know a little bit, what could be a great commute experience, and what could be commuting in 10 years from now?
I mean, there are different ideas that float around there in terms of commuting. I mean, because one thing is today there's sort of most people only have one way to commute, typically, or one preferred way. And I think in the future you can look at different commuting modalities. I mean, certainly with automation and self-driving cars, I think we're looking at this ability to really have that be a very sort of focused meeting space, for instance, for brainstorming, for sort of setting up the day, right? There's kind of a ritual that can happen where you spend whatever the half an hour or the hour setting up everything for the day. You check in with all your colleagues, and then when you get to work, you sort of have you're really well set up. And the same happens at the end of the day, where you use that time to sort of wind down and close up the workday.
So running your team, I believe we could learn a lot from you, how you operate your team, and maybe which model inspire you how to operate or how to lead your design squad. So what is your approach to run a team and to empower the people?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we see a lot of changes in leadership in recent years, and the same has been, the case with small organizations or bigger ones like the one that I'm in. But I think there's a couple of things that are really important. One is to be able to be extremely flexible, right? So in the same way that we just said that spaces have to be adaptable, people absolutely have to be adaptable. We're seeing a big shift away from like individual work towards communal or group work as a whole. And so I think that also changes the way that we lead projects, right? So I think in where like organizations are becoming more flat, obviously, and I think that has a real benefit that leadership isn't seen anymore by your hierarchical position, in the company, but it's by your actions, right? Your actions make you a leader, and leaders emerge out of all the ranks of the company. And so I think as a leader, when you have a team, you have to be extremely sort of open and aware to that the good ideas can come from anywhere, right? And you have to sort of foster that creativity. You have to provide the psychological safety for people to be creative. And I think you also have to be generationally agnostic, right? So age, as much as the workforce is getting younger, I'm also seeing more of like teams where you have great ranges of ages, and it's really inspiring to see how, again, like the inspiration can come from all spectrum, all ends of the spectrum.
You talk about age. What is the advantage of an older designer comparing to the young ones?
I mean, if you put me and the older designer, which I think I should be, I think the benefit is that we learn to orchestrate, right? Instead of like being an individual contributor only, it's really about connecting the dots. It's about understanding people, abilities, and put them in the right positions, right? So, and I think that's a really important part of certainly managing a team. I also think in the creative field, doing the work yourself is still really important. And in a sense, you have to lead by example. And so if you're never going to pick up a pencil as a design leader, I think you may risk losing the credibility with your team. And so I think, still staying sharp as a designer is really important, even when you're running teams.
Just to the audience. So we also take care about your question. You will find the Q&A chat on your screen. So type in your questions. I will come to these questions later. And recently I read a scenario about 2030. And then they described comparing to the game industry, like in the future, there will be not like a game master, a scope of work master. And the scope of work master, he is a person who shows up all the tasks, what to do. And the squad, like the gaming squad, take over then these kind of tasks. They believe they really match into the profile of this kind of squad. Do you believe there will be this kind of job in the future, a scope of work master?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that so much, but I think in general, I mean, what the gaming industry has really done in ways that no other industry has been able to go is to really deliver on this promise of immersive, immersive and remote problem solving, remote collaborations, and I think there's a lot of like our industries can learn from that, for sure. Like I think there's what I love about gaming is that you don't have any physical constraints in the gaming
Mm.
environment, much like in the movie environment, right? And so the constraints of physics. So it opens up endless possibilities in scale and shape and materials. And I think that sort of unbridled creativity that you see that can really be inspiring to designers and architects and to kind of yeah, I mean, think outside the box certainly, and then sort of bring it back into the real world, world of physics to make it real.
So I'm always impressed when I'm not a gamer, by the way, but whenever I get the opportunity to take a look, I do that, my friends, or when I go to a studio. So what do you think, what could architecture learn from the gaming industry? Or is there anything what architecture could learn from the gaming industry?
Yeah, I think architects in general, I mean, what I've seen in recently is that architects already have that approach that they kind of go wild in 3D CAD, right? Before they sort of bring it down. And so I think it is really that um, thinking in ways in which I think I just kind of said that, but thinking in ways in which you're not constrained so much by like having to manufacture something, right? And I think the creativity is really what is the greatest thing that architecture can take away, and to not be constrained. I mean, I think architecture of the future is. We always think about the big buildings by the architects and so on, but I think it's also we need to I think it's sort of small living and low cost living is one of the most important things that we need to think about.
So, but so it seems like as a designer, maybe you and your team, you will never have, maybe you have a portion of routine tasks, but not so many like the normal knowledge worker have. So do you believe there will be a time in the future where there are no more routine tasks and everything is built on co-creation and collaboration? And how far could be this picture away?
Right. I mean, I think, I think computers are really enabling us to become much more focused at, like away from data entry, which we're still all doing a little bit, and more towards connecting the dots, right? And I think that's something that's not happening immediately. I think that like routine tasks are basically going to become shorter and fewer, and transactional experiences are going to become also less and less. And so I think that really opens up our space, our mind space, to become a lot more focused on things that matter for creativity, like play, like contemplation, and so on. So I think it's really but I think it's something where it's about, maybe in 10 years we'll see significant automation across most of our routine tasks. And I think between now and then it's going to be in little steps, right? And we're seeing it happening already.
So and another point is your job or what you do would open up the opportunity that we could create from any physical thing a digital twin to professionalize or to work much more better on these things in a synchronous way versus in an asynchronous way. How do you think, is there an opportunity that in the future, like maybe every building or every machine gets its digital twin? Or will we there kind of a parallel universe then?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think there doesn't need to be a digital twin, right, to real life things. I mean, in some spaces, it makes a lot of sense, like maps. And, I mean, again, like if you think about virtual worlds that allow people who are disabled, for instance, of people of different abilities can, for instance, travel, to places they've never been to, because they now have a digital twin in the virtual world, and I think those are amazing things that can happen. But I'm not sure we need to have digital twins of every aspect. I think the world is moving really, really fast at a fast pace, but as embodied human beings, we're not really evolving that much quicker. And so I think our need for sort of tactility and real life physical objects is extremely high. And I think as we move forward as a society, we're going to have to sort of learn to make smart choices about what things do we want to be in the digital world and what things do we not want to be digital, because we lose a sense of tactility and relationship to the real world. So you just have to learn to really be smart about it.
I want to build on this question, the next one. So what are the unique human qualities what a designer needs out of your perspective, and what you believe what we should be aware as humans to step in the next decade?
I think more than anything, like the thing that's important for us moving forward is common sense. And really by that, I mean this sort of practical decision making, the ability to imagine the consequences of the things that we do. And I think as designers, we've lived in the space for decades of like possibilities. What can we do? What's possible with material, with technology, and so on. And I think now designers are having to shift, with all the kind of pressures and I would say challenges that we're facing, of society and the environment and so on. I think now we're shifting from what can you do into what should you do, right? Because the consequences of our work now can come back 20-fold in the future. It could be in positive ways or in negative ways. And so I think that's one really important thing. I think also cultural sensibility is really important. I think we're becoming a more diverse workforce, and I think if we're designing for an audience that is becoming more diverse, our teams need to be more diverse, and so I think that sensibility is important. Also, if we want to design products, this is kind of our mission at Google, is to design products that are helpful. You may have heard that, but I think it's a really nice guiding principle, right? Because it helps you to sort of weed out the not important things from what is really critical. And I think to do that, you need to have empathy. You need to build empathy into your work practices. And so I think that's another important one. And I think maybe the last one is, we hear that a lot, but it's creativity and curiosity. It's something that works across every profession, and it leads to innovation. And I think that's, again, in the design field, we're already trained to do that, but I think we're seeing creativity now creep into a lot more of the general industry, which is great.
So how you get inspiration to go beyond? I read that you're ultra marathon runner. It's 50 or 100 kilometers. And I read you get your best ideas by running and by surfing, but to run 50 kilometers, you need a lot of time. So how you get your inspiration to go beyond the existing?
So I think the way that I think about this kind of creativity in the creative space is that first you need to create sort of a psychological safe space, right, where people can express ideas. I mean, that's what we do with our teams, and that's what we practice. I mean, psychological safety also means again that people who are not used to being creative, non-designers, right, are encouraged to bring out the ideas, because the ideas can come from the most unexpected places, right? So I think that is sort of like creating the right culture. And then I think the other thing, though, that the thing that really will bring in creativity is to invite a little bit of chaos. There's this scientist, Fritjof Capra, who talks about this chaos theory. And really, I mean, the way that translates in our work is that we bring in unstructured play and unstructured exploration, right? And sometimes just really encourage our teams to think outside of the industry. And that just yields, you know, not every session yields results, but every once in a while you get the spark that just brings in really different thinking. Like that's really interesting. And I mean, the other thing is you need to provide, you know, the space and the tools for creativity, right? So creativity can strike anywhere, right? It's not always just when you're at work in front of an empty sheet of paper. Now the ideas are flowing. We know that. And so I think what we're doing a lot with my team and thinking about immersive technologies and AI is how to lower the barriers for you to be creative and to capture that creativity when it comes to you, right? So like note-taking, visual pinboards, and all these things on the fly, and making technology really feel like an extension of yourself, of your body when you go about your life. I mean, it's really important for creativity is to make sure you have focus, right? So we live in a world of distractions, and so really my goal for technology moving forward is that technology becomes less of an ends, you know, a means to an end, but it's more sort of no, it is more of a means to an end, right? It is less of like this object that sometimes stands between us and the work that we want to do, or between us and other people, but technology starts to fade into the background and just sort of augments us.
We kept a short leadership. I want just a question back to the leadership topic, because you mentioned these topics, how important are culture or culture techniques, and we talk about creativity. Today, leadership is much more driven by managers, and they are trained in strategy. So they are not trained in creativity, and they are not trained even in culture techniques, how to deal with humans. So what would be your recommendation to these guys to seduce them, maybe to step in that and to take that as an opportunity?
What aspect of management are you talking about? Can you be more specific?
If you look around, if you go to the offices, the leadership is trained in strategy, not in cultural techniques, and even not in creativity.
Right. I would say that one of the things that works best for us is to, you know, not be stuck in your specific definition of your job, right? And I think it's kind of to think to sometimes put on the hat of somebody else in your team, and I think that really helps to sort of like change roles a lot as you're working. I think that to me is one thing that works a lot with our teams, is when you sort of spend maybe a month where you're digging much deeper into a subject matter that is of passion to you, right? I think if there's no passion behind it, if you're just managing sort of like by matrices and so on, I think we're seeing, that's something that I heard in the talk last week, also Eve mentioning, right? You see a lot of designers that are getting trapped in this place where they're being asked to become managers, but they're really not that skilled at it. And so I think it's like the ability to identify that in yourself, and that identify that in others is what is the right path for you. You know, are you someone who needs to be creative 80% of the time, or are you someone who can kind of foster creativity through the building of teams? And I mean, there's different ways to get to that, but I think identifying it is critical.
Thank you. So let's jump again in 2030. So what would be your preferred space, your preferred design studio for your team in 10 years from now? How would it look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think if I'm designing my future office, maybe I want to think about like, what are the trends, you know, like 2030, that's 10 years from now. What are the people trends, right? So we're going to have these kind of global dynamic teams. So our workforce is becoming more diverse and in a way, but also kind of more similar. We're working in more similar ways. And then the Gen Z is entering the workforce in 3 years, right? And that really is going to have an impact on the types of offices that we're going to be building. And then on the technology kind of trend side, I think there's ambient and cloud computing that really means you don't have any fixed CPUs anymore, right? The content follows you around. And so, again, to my earlier point, I think that's really, really great that that because creativity strikes anywhere, and work is kind of it's a cognitive space. And another thing I think too that's coming in, I mean, I'm obviously working in that space a lot, is spatial computing. Because I think more and more the limiting factor is not computing anymore, right? The limiting factor is the ability to display information. And so I think spatial interfaces and realistic co-presence, those things are really gonna, those are elements I would want to bring in. And so I think, you know, to create like the perfect office in general, I think that sort of building a healthy environment is going to be required. It's not just optional anymore. You know, we need to have spaces that encourage movement and sort of embodied collaboration, and probably also thinking about spaces that blend with nature and unplugged spaces. You know, like more human sensory type of activities. And actually, you know, I'm thinking the Vitra did a nice pamphlet about the future of work right after the beginning of COVID, and there were a lot of like really thoughtful elements in there as well that inspired me. But I think I was talking about Gen Z, and I think one of the expectations of Gen Z is that work is becoming more and more a place where you learn and develop new skills, but isn't just where you deliver something for the company, but you actually get something out of it. And so I think the workspaces have to reflect these kind of this educational component to it. And then I also think one thing that I would love to see is the more decentralized or federalized office model, like, you know, like Switzerland. And more of the hub and spoke model where you have, you know, the kind of, you know, headquarters and then sort of the smaller satellite offices. And I think that, yeah, that really amps up creativity as well.
So you mentioned a point with the generations.
Yeah.
What could we do to help the other generations not to get lost in terms of upskilling or reskilling? So do we have any ideas?
Yes, I mean, there's no question, right, that like in the next decade, like jobs will be kind of dominated by the service sector, and this is very influenced by global changes that are occurring. And so if on the one hand we have, you know, more jobs in technology like cloud and AI and health and robotics, right, we're gonna see these sort of jobs that are expiring, right, like robotics. Like robotics affects drivers and manual laborers, and AI affects journalists and operators. And but I think, well, like the area that I'm really excited about outside of our realm, but it's sort of the regenerative fields, you know, thinking about sustainable food production, power, land management, resource management, these kind of jobs. You know, I think this is where the future kind of is, you know, in addition to like the hardcore technology aspects. I mean, I think if I think about the design industry, and we've heard that in the previous talk as well, but I think I see designers' work not getting replaced, but getting augmented in the foreseeable future, right? So I think one of the important skills of a designer will be to learn to work with AI and to some degree, you know, robotics to really come at the best possible designs, right? I think, yeah, and also, of course, the interplay of the designers industrial designers, certainly, they have to transition from being purely industrial design to, you know, sustainability designers, really knowing about interface design, because those categories are melting a lot more than they used to.
I want to bring now some questions in from the audience, and we start with a question from Christoph Bersch. He's part of the German Designers Club. So, Claude, it would be great if Claude could give a practical example about what they are working on.
Well, that's a good question. I work in a space that is has its eyes turned pretty much into the future. So we, you know, I mean, we work on a range of things. So I mean, my team has been responsible for VR headsets in the past. You know, last year we did a great thing at the Furniture Fair in Milan, where we looked at neuroaesthetics, and it was a super interesting thing where we developed this sensory band that could perceive your impressions of visual spaces as you walk through different visual spaces. You could get a readout of which space had the most soothing effect on your psyche, most calming effect. And so so thinking a lot about how AI enabled products can make our life better in a way. And so, I mean, I can't speak very specifically about what we're working on right now, but we are really thinking about, you know, Google offers great services, and how can we build product that bring these services to us people in ways that is really human and optimistic and user friendly.
It must be super exciting for you every morning to wake up to work on these ideas. So I have another question by Samantha Lesky. How is progress going on holographic interactive information displays?
Holographic interactive information
display.
Right. Well, I mean, we have 3D displays exist, and they. So I mean, in a way, holographic is an extension of 3D displays. I think they haven't really found their niche yet. Certainly, I envision a future where, especially now that we spend so much time working remotely and talking to people on a flat screen, I mean, certainly there will be a future in which you're going to be able to have video conferencing calls that feel a lot more realistic, and I think 3D technologies will be a big part of that, right? I mean, we've learned, you know, like having a Brady Bunch grid in front of you with 16 little faces, it's just not a natural way to communicate, right? And so I think technologies will evolve to have much more real life renditions of other people in space, and so I think that's one of the most promising things, I think, in the holographic space. I mean, the other, of course, is that when you're in an immersive environment, you're wearing a headset or glasses or something like that, you can, of course, mimic holographics. And then I think that is just an incredible experience. I don't know if you have had time to do it yourself, but I think this sort of the depth that comes with having holographic interfaces, it's really provides for a very rich interaction. But it's also something that one has to get used to, because we're not currently doing that kind of interaction, except in the real world, of course.
I believe you have seen the movie Ready Player One from Steven Spielberg. So
yes, I read the book.
How far are we away from this Ready Player One experience?
Well, there are some areas in which the laws of physics, I hate to say it, but are a little bit prohibitive. I mean, obviously, a big part of that type of immersion, let me paraphrase, though, it's like this idea that you can go into a virtual space where you're truly embodying another character, right? And you're feeling its pain, you can control, you literally feel like you're there. There's a lot of steps involved, and a lot of research has been done, you know, as to like what are the hurdles for that. I think the visual part of it is probably the easiest to resolve, right? Once we have extremely wide field of view, extremely high resolution displays that are extremely light, so you don't actually feel them on your head, you're sort of nailing the visual aspect of virtual reality, right? But then I think the biggest next hurdle is the tactile / input aspect, which is much more difficult to handle, because in a way, like every interaction you have, whether you're flying an airplane or you're fighting someone mid-air. They all have different physics, and the human is extremely perceptive to things that aren't quite right. So the slightest misalignment. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into sort of the interface side of things for this to become real.
Yeah, and to all of the audience, if you have never seen this movie before, you should do that, even if you're not a sci-fi fan. There is a question from Pedro from Spain. I think he is in Barcelona today. In this beta world in which we live in, how can the physical world catch up with the digital world?
The physical world will never, I mean, it never has to, I don't think it has to catch up with it, right? I think the physical, in a world where we have more and more digital experiences, right? And I mean, future generations are becoming a lot more comfortable and well-versed with digital experiences. We still have some limitations, right? And I think the physical objects that we have in our lives, they may become fewer over time. I certainly hope they do from a sustainability point of view. But they also, I think we will cherish them in a way more. As we have more digital experience, we'll cherish our physical objects more. And so having, that's why you see a lot of like return to craft and return to like simple tactile objects, right? Because I think people feel like there is a space for both, right? And the physical objects, they don't have to catch up with the digital. They don't have to match the digital. They are their unique things. They have the unique properties, and I think people will pay more attention to things that are of, you know, lasting quality and rich materials and that sort of light up the senses, if you will. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but it's kind of how I see it.
It's up to Pedro, yeah. I think he's smart enough to take a lot out of these. There's another question from Robert. Would Claude elaborate more on why the forces are heading us towards less individual and more group work?
I think this is, it's a good question. I mean, in general, I think we're just seeing the results of group work really accelerate thinking. You know, it's the sort of the 1 + 1 = 3 does apply to teams, right? And I think whenever, I mean, there is of course very much a need for individual heads down work. Everybody needs that. Most people need that, right? And so it's sort of a like an ideal work day is a combination of exhale and inhale, right? Where you like you go out, you exchange ideas, and you take it back in, you digest it. But I think the ratio of how much time is spent in groups versus individual has changed a lot, because you're just seeing the results flourish a lot more, right? So I think, yeah, in the past, a boss used to say, okay, here's your job for the next couple of weeks. You go and figure it out, and then you present it at the end. And if you went a little bit off track, then you have to reset the person and say, okay, you're sorry, you went a little bit in the wrong direction. Let's try this again. And 2 weeks are gone. But I think in a much more collaborative environment, which is groups based, it means that you just sort of like, you can course correct all the time, right? You question things all the time. And I think that's, you know, another thing is that, you know, the workforce, young people who come into the workforce, they demand more variety in projects, right? And they demand to be stimulated. And I think group work is part of that. Being able to work in different kinds of teams, not always the exact same team, is also something that just, it increases job satisfaction, right? Because you sort of circulate more. Your circle widens.
So we are living in hard times, so regarding to the complexity. So do you think that in the future, even your design teams should mix up with artists, philosophers, people from other disciplines and characters to how to say, to really understand, to get the full picture and to come up with something new?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it starts with education. I think the future, like the successful design colleges and, you know, architectures and so on, will be the ones that really mix disciplines, right? So I think young students get used to this idea of working across different disciplines. And I mean, the ones you mentioned are exactly right? I mean, for us to be creating a future of sustainable product development, right? That really means we need to know a lot more than we traditionally needed to know. And I think advanced material design is a big part of it. And you can't ask of the designer to know all of it himself, otherwise he will get lost in the minutia of material science, right? But I think it's really important that you have those collaborations. Another really big one is to know about, so for instance, privacy matters or trust. You know, how do you build trust into a product? And when you have so much information in the clouds, I mean, obviously that's top of mind for us at Google. And again, like that's where, yeah, working with people who are very versed in the ethical field and psychology is really enriching.
And another point brings me from this question to the next one. So if you travel, especially in Europe, or if you go to Asia and you go to this museum with the old masterpieces, so often I think they are hidden and forgotten. What you would recommend, what we could learn from the past in terms of how to design something? And I would say much more far beyond from our age.
Yes, right. I mean, oh yeah, further than Vitra, right? Yes. I think the one thing, I mean, certainly when I think about the sort of the Middle Ages, I think about, you know, like a Leonardo da Vinci or someone, an artist who is very, very broad in this field of study. And I think that, to me, the sort of the observation of nature part is extremely important. And I think it got lost in the industrial age. And I think that's something that we're going to see come back really strongly, like in ways, you know, one example is biomimicry, and which is exactly what Da Vinci already did. But I think now with the technology that we have accessible to us, it's going to be like one of the ways in which we can truly like leapfrog technology and not just do incremental things. I mean, I just love observing things like, you know, how does the brain of a woodpecker work and why does he not get concussions? Mm-hmm. And then you can study and you figure out like how the brain is suspended in a special liquid, and then that can be translated into how we design helmets. And so I think that observation element was so strong back then because we lived a lot more outside and in nature and with the raw elements. And that to me is something that we should take forward.
I have a wonderful question from Anne. So Claude, what is your definition for a good enough product? I love this question.
A good enough product. I mean, that's really good.
100 points.
Good enough. That, of course, it would be, I would want to qualify that. Does that mean good enough for it to be selling like hotcakes? Or is it good enough for us maybe as a humans, which I would put that metric above all others, right? Is it for us? Well, I should say, is it good for us humans? Is it good for the world around us, right? So I think those are the two metrics that you put for a product, right? So, and if it's good for us, I mean, not every product has to be helpful in the way I said earlier. Certainly being helpful to you is something really, really important and meaningful, right? Does it truly improve your existence? I mean, that's maybe a little bit broad, but does it truly improve one aspect of your existence? I think with the COVID time, we've become more aware again of what's really important to us, you know, what is frivolous, what is not important. That being said, I think entertainment, amusing ourselves, is still a part of us humans. You know, we can't downplay the importance of that. And so I think it's mostly like, is it helpful, and maybe is it entertaining, not at the cost of being helpful or being bad for the environment, right? And then the other thing is, is it good enough? That means, is it good enough to meet the bar of sustainability? How much of a footprint do we create through this generation of the product, and do we really need it?
I was a little bit shocked. Recently I read an article in National Geographic. It was the action title was "A Life Without Waste," and in the article they described that we human take out of this planet Earth every year 1 billion tons of raw material, 1 billion tons every year, and only 10% is going into the circular economy. 20% is going to long-time goods like houses or cars. Honestly, how could that happen?
You're referring to the other 70% that isn't going into either, right? That is just getting...
It's waste at the end.
Ends up in landfill. Yeah. I mean, I think we've just been blind for too long to the effects. And when you look back, you think, how could we have not seen that this isn't going to go in a good direction? How could we have not extrapolated the consequences of our action, right? Which I was saying earlier, as a designer, it's so important to do, but not just as a designer. I find it shocking as well, I have to admit. And I think, sometimes one part of me says, we should, the only way to get there is to really stop the production of products, really reduce dramatically the number of products that we consume. But I think the main thing for me that's going to lead to improvements is, on the one hand, you can let market forces act, right? Companies are going to, I think consumers are going to demand more and more sustainable products, right? Consumers care about the health of them, their body, their mind, and the world. And so that's going to become a competitive advantage for companies to be able to show a proven track record in sustainability. And so on the one hand, that's a market force, but I also think that really oftentimes, there's a saying that says, environmental thinking is only for the rich people. There was an article in New York Times about that. And I think there's some truth to that, right? If you're someone who's worrying about how to feed your family, over the next week, you are not going to think about the broader picture. You can't, right? You have to think about yourself and your family first. And so I think that's why, in addition to the market forces, we also need strong government regulation, which I think in this country is not a very popular thing to say, but I think there's no way around it, right? I mean, it's actually easy. I mean, like China has a big benefit there. They can just, if they have an idea about the environment, they're just going to put down the law, and then everybody has to abide by it. Of course, they have their loopholes as well, but I think sometimes we can learn from that in the West a little bit, and that we're taking way too long to put down regulations that really would let sustainability trickle down all the way. I just think it's like, okay, how long does it take us to outlaw certain things like plastic bags? It's too slow. It's frustrating.
So recently, the chief designer from Nike came up. He was inspired by the Bauhaus, like form follows function, and then he thought, he leaves the quote, form follows function, it's not enough. It should be form and function follows footprint. Do we need laws, or could it happen that companies follow other companies like Patagonia to say, no?
I don't know if it's on your end or my end. I'm sorry, Raphael, but I didn't catch the last bit of it. Form follows not function, but what?
Form follows function is not enough. So he mentioned form and function follows footprint. And now, hopefully, Nike step ahead and set a new approach and is maybe on the way like Patagonia is. I don't believe we need laws. I believe we need companies which go now ahead and set up new standards. Could that happen? Claude is lost.
Unfortunately, you're breaking up again. Okay. I don't sure if it's on my end.
Okay, good. So I tried again. No, you know what I do? I go for a question from the audience. We have a Gen Z designer in the audience. So as a Gen Z industrial designer, I'm thinking on how to align my skill set. I'm interested in human interfaces design, but my passion lies in designing physical products. Do you have any more tips on how to further develop my skill set in a useful direction? To these Lucas.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get asked that question a lot when I visit, design institutions. I think there's almost an anxiety that has arisen because we've put so much emphasis on interface design. And, you hear things like product design is dead, physical design is dead. And so I've seen designers who really want to be in the physical space move to interaction design. And I don't think that should be something that you do out of fear. I think a lot of good interaction designers I've seen, and I don't mean necessarily interface designer, but more interaction designer, right? Like how to use products and so on, have a very strong product design thinking as well. So the two of them are not that far from one another, right? I think that all of the design thinking that goes into it is the same. So I would, but certainly, like I have always been drawn more to the physicality of things, and so I think as a designer, you should just follow your heart there, and then just try to augment that. So if your passion is more in maybe motion design and interface design, then go there, right? But learn about the other category as well. I don't think you have to focus completely, right? I think we need more generalists. A lot of the times, the real focus area in your career comes, I would say, in the 1 to 5 first year of your work. That's where you really specialize and you really learn about like how it's actually done. And so I think being fairly general in your earlier design career is recommended.
No, so thank you very much. I will close up now the session. Your screen gets a little bit freezy. Maybe more and more people wake up in LA and they also want to use the internet. And maybe for that reason, it was struggling. So to all of you in the audience, we will also do a graphic recording from this session and provide that to you on the Swissnex website. Then you will also find a recording from this session on the Swissnex website. I also recommend to you, there's a great video about Claude from last year, a 25 or 30 minute speech where he starts in 2040 and talks about his avatar, which helps in designing. To recap the session, I'm not able to do that because at the end it was more than, oh my God, around 30 questions to you. So thank you very much. The next session will be November 18 or 19. We will see. We also announce who will be my guest. So in these times, stay healthy, take care, be curious, challenge the status quo, and be much more creative than a manager. Goodbye. Thank you.